Before we actually attempt analyzation and commentary, they asked me to reread a couple that seem to have escaped. The corrector's pencil. One kid thought to himself, anyone who actually needs social, that is hormonal advice, is actually in need of more than that. Like a keeper. A handler? Is anybody out there? And the other one was do-do-do. Well, I guess they weren't actually corrections. Here we go. You're not fully civilized till you're civilized twice. The first shot of anything never works sufficiently, such as a immunization. The first shot of anything never works sufficiently for a thinker. But the second shot is always too much anyway, was the part that was left out. And this other one that seemed to have had something left out. One man says that if he lets relatives stay with him for more than a week, they become too much like the truth. My suspicion is that this was based upon an old sort of a one-liner joke, cum proverbial wisdom, that relatives who stay with you longer than a week get to be like fish. The situation begins to smell. We don't have enough down-home people. It's like suddenly an old maiden aunt or drunken crazy uncle shows up and you hadn't seen him in years and go, well, hey, and he just says, well, he's just in town, and like the first night, maybe the second day, the third day, it's kind of fun having him around. But having a relative that you can't just throw out like a stranger necessarily, staying longer than a week, is kind of like having a fish you bought and you lay it on the table and you don't refrigerate and you don't cook it. It's like after about a week, you kind of wish it'd go away real badly. Man says, now I'll reread it. Man says if he lets relatives stay with him more than a week, they become too much like the truth. Now would you like to kind of switch it around, because this was a whole series about familiarity. No? All right. One man says if he lets the truth stay around for longer than a week, it becomes too much like a dead fish. Some news items, they didn't ask me to editorialize, but it seems to me sometimes some of these news items may get too cute for their own good. If cute, in fact, be the word. Well, let's see what the actual... Here we go. The moment they're born, life offers everyone a secret deal. Some of you don't remember these words, but trust me, this is a news item. This is not one of those little things like I just did that was a takeoff on some proverbial truism. This is a news item. Fact. The moment they're born, life offers everyone a secret deal, which is, quote, this is life speaking. Don't ask, and I won't tell. Except if you take this a little bit further into the area, which I'm sure you did, of intellectual activity and not just physical birth, then it would appear, as oftentimes the case with these news items, that this is just the opposite from any normal view of conventional wisdom. Because anyone who's trying to think, what are they trying to think besides whatever specific interest they may have in astronomy or physics or horse breeding? The general thrust is that they want to know what's going on. What's the whole sign of a philosopher? Either with a big P or a little p. Of a wise man, an insightful man. Is he wants to know. He wants to know what's going on in life, what makes people tick. That seems to be it. All reasonable, intelligent, ordinary people would insist that be true. But since I'm stuck here, standing here, frozen with fear before the cameras, I'm here, they're paying me to uphold this kind of stuff. So I got to defend this position. It says the secret deal that life offers is contrary to that. That it tells everyone, the moment you're born, not later, not somewhere along when you were majoring in philosophy or trying to stumble through your own study of comparative religion, it says the moment you were born, life offers everyone this deal. Don't ask, and I won't tell. If you try and put that together with the position that ordinary people would maintain themselves, that they do want to know, they do want to ask, that contrary to this foolishness, they are in fact trying to ask life through all its many institutions and intermediaries or anyone they can grab. What's going on? What can you tell me? I want to know what's going on in life. What if that's not true? What if you are upholding, if you're ordinary, your side of the bargain, that you accepted the deal? Life says, don't ask and I won't tell. I mean, you got to talk about something, I know. So you can say, well, that's not true. If you're ordinary, you couldn't say, well, that's not true. By God, I want to know the secret of life. I've gone to great trouble. I've spent, many times, I've even bought new books. Spent well over $20 for a book that said, like, maybe the secret of life, or how to understand life better, that kind of thing. And I've gone to lectures and that. So don't tell me that. But notice you could still be upholding the secret deal. Life said, don't ask, and I won't tell. If we were real childish, I could expand that, I guess, and life was saying, all right, certain things don't ask, and I won't tell. But see, you were smart when you were a kid like that. The moment you were born, you understood. It said, don't ask, and I won't tell. You knew what it meant when it said, don't ask. It didn't have to say, don't ask certain things. It just said, don't ask. And it left you free. After that, you can ask all kinds of things. Like, what in the hell has happened to the Mets this year? How can so many bad things happen to so many good people? How can I call people who live in the greater New York area good people? All kinds of philosophical / sports questions. In neural prisons, all cell doors have an escape that you can walk right through. And it's right before everyone's very eyes, and its name is direct vision, which I would suggest to you is tied to the one I just read, in that it would be a form of asking. But not the kind of asking that people ordinarily do. Because in neural confinement, again, people would say, well, I do ask. If we're going, I'm speaking for an ordinary person. If they say, well, we'll take your description of being in some sort of neural confinement. Contrary, I ask all the times. I'm continually beating, calling out for the guards and priests and rabbis and philosophers, and looking out the window and daydreaming, plotting my escape. Of course, I assume if that ordinary person also did not hear our other news item earlier this week or take it to heart, that if you don't know where you're confined, what you do is end up rattling the wrong bars. You understand? You've seen James Cagney movies. Let me out of here, you dirty screws, and banging your cups on the bars, except you're banging them on the wrong bars. You got to figure it out for yourself. We're talking serious science fiction time, right? Because then you say, wait a minute, it's just me and my bars. How can I be banging on the wrong bars and rattling them saying, let me out of here? There's some strange things going on in life. That's part of the secret deal. It's like you grabbing life by the throat and saying, let me out of here. What if you got the wrong life? You got to remember, Jim Henson was not one hand puppet. He had a slew of characters. If you don't believe it, just go back, for instance, and read the Old Testament. And they're just listed, just one after, I can't remember all their names. Kermit the Lawgiver, I can't remember them all. You can end up rattling the wrong bars. But notice what a great secret deal. You can bang on the bars with your cup. You can holler. You can spit. You can throw your slop jar out there toward the guards. But what if you're doing it inside the wrong cell? Now, I'm not going to stop and try to deal with reason and logic because I thought we had grown people here. Because then you say, well, how can you be in the wrong cell? Well, if you don't know where you are, you're in the wrong cell. So you can be beating on the bars, rattling the cup, hollering, let me out, let me out. And if you don't know where you are, how do you know? What are you going to do? Well, you can always be religious, I know. It was known, remember this escape that's in every door is known as direct vision. Might I suggest perhaps one other possible name? It would be like to see a point blank door. The news item said right before your very eyes. Where, damn it? And along similar lines, the next item, the flesh on the bones of neural prisons are the words from other folks' minds. No one would consider that when it comes to neural captivity, that the flesh on the bones, the stones in the wall, the bars on the door, might all be under the auspices of that great organization, Plagiarism Incorporated. You don't mean to tell me, sir, that it's possible that we're all being held captive through one thing? There's only one thing keeping us like we are? Could be. You're not going to tell us it's plagiarism. Might. Well, don't. All right, I won't. But then again, ordinary people, when they think of some captivity, let's go back to religious or philosophical, they think, well, what might set us free would be, and then of course the religious waive their holy scriptures, and the philosophical would waive their intellectual traditions in the West. They'd be, Plato, Aristotle, and they would say, here is our escape if we only but understood it. Or they wave the Bible. Here it is. Here is our freedom, our liberation, if we but understood it. What if it, pardon the expression, is almost just the opposite? That you're continually, with no great effort on anyone's part, kept in intellectual confinement by plagiarism. And yet again, you can do it, I can do it right quick. A man can hold up a Bible, the words of Buddha, the words of anybody, and say, no. It's the great wisdom of the world. That perhaps offers the one possible avenue of escape, if we but understood it, if I could but study it more. You mean if you could but more eat somebody else's vomit? Well, I wouldn't have put it that way. I know you wouldn't. I know you wouldn't. Well, surely some of you began to get a glimpse. It is, their position is unassailable from any ordinary view. You cannot say, and I don't single out any author or any holy book, but from any ordinary view, you cannot take the words of the guides, or even the translated words, the interpretations of the Ezekiels and the Moseses and the Buddhas and the Mohammeds and then all the philosophers. From any ordinary view, you can't say that and say, wait a minute, the whole purpose of that is to clamp down on your brain. All collective wisdom says otherwise. That no. All of this offers some sort of like an esoteric key. If we but understood it, if the truth therein could be deeperly revealed, into the cockles and crevices of my heart, we would all be free. Yes, but if you can see it, there's no way to look at it. As long as you're thinking somebody else's thoughts. Now forget who, it doesn't matter. Your Uncle Charlie's or Muhammad's, whichever one seems to appeal to you the most. As long as you're thinking somebody else's thoughts, you are in a form of prison. And if we were not talking to ordinary people, I'd drop the allegorical inference of a form of prison. Your mind's just locked down. You're in solitary confinement, or you're in lockdown, as they call it in prison. You ain't going anywhere. You ain't even going outside to exercise. No shower, no nothing. You're stuck there. But notice all the time thinking, if I could just study a little more, if I'll meditate on these words, if I'll memorize them, I'll take a dirty needle and I'll scratch, let my people go, or some famous, love thy neighbor. If I scratch it here and I memorize, I'll think about it all the time. It'll set me free. If you can't think, it almost sounds okay. Makes you feel like, well, by God, I'm getting somewhere. I mean, I'm stuck here in this little cell. I can't move. I can't go anywhere. I'm not even sure where I am. But if I keep thinking about blank, 2 plus 2 equals 4. E plus MC squared. God is love. If I keep thinking about that, something will happen. Well, what might happen from an ordinary view, this is not literally true, but we could say, to be charitable, well, what might happen at least is it might keep you from going nuts for the next 45 or 50, 60 years. But plagiarism is no key to freedom. And if you'd like to expand your definition or concept of plagiarism, could I refer you back to the guy who said if you let the truth hang around more than a week, it begin to smell like an unwashed relative. What do you mean the truth? I already thought that. What the hell kind of truth is that? One way to tell if you're neurally aging on schedule and meeting life's high standards. The test is this. You're not only pretty much neurally deceased, cranky, and out of sorts, but also almost perversely proud of it. I know this doesn't apply to anybody, but look around. Many people that even pass in public lie. If you don't know, can't think of any person you actually know. People that pass for being commentators, news analysts, philosophers. The older they get, it's very common. People that have very honorable or acknowledged academic, intellectual degrees and background and credentials, the older they get, the more it's brought up about something. Well, what do you think of popular music nowadays? Maybe the guy's a philosopher, written books on economics, and they interview him and they get around to, I understand you used to play the saxophone back in high school. Oh yes, I can remember the days of Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey. I almost became a musician. And the interview said, well, that's very interesting. Well, do you ever listen to music nowadays? You call that music? And if you listen, they almost do it with a perverse pride. And so, well, how about, since we brought music, what do you think of, like the styles now? I know you're still wearing such and such clothes. What do you think? That's not clothes. And all you got to do is ask somebody a little bit, and they will almost begin to elaborate without doing it necessarily specifically in words, but they show a kind of perverse pride over the fact everything sucks. The further it is away from when I began to die, which is of course not how they put it, from my time, the worse it is. And it's almost as though if you'll look, there's a point to this, but if you'll look, one more time I'll add, you can see they don't understand, but they almost have a gleam of like, well, ask me another one. I'll get even more wound up. Ask me about just morality in general. In other words, they're saying, do you believe life's going to hell? Yeah. Yeah, but do you really believe it? Oh, yeah. Ah, come on, you don't really believe it. Goddamn right I believe it. That it's almost, ask me some more, and it's almost a kind of, when I say a perverse pride, it's life doing it. But it's almost showing an increase that, I'm almost dead. There's no chance for me to understand anything. I have lived a good life. Remember, the heading of this was the way to show, to check, to prove that you have neurally aged on time and living up to life's high standards. Because life doesn't expect you to be interviewed, no matter who you are, at some grown age, 40, 50. If somebody asks you a question and you show any signs of intellectual life, what the hell's wrong with you? That's not the kind of standards life set. Look around you. What are you, a weirdo? What are you, a prevert? That's a Southern psychological, clinical category. That is not meeting life standards. Thinker's bonus round question. Why talk about something you never think about? I don't know whether we should even fool with that. If you're an ordinary person and was taking into this or trying to take it seriously, then you could say, well, nobody talks about anything they don't think about. Somebody would say that. What do they use for brains? That was just an aside. Contraire. If we're not beginning to make the word smell, think about for a second. Just consider what you and just normal course of conversation with people socially, cocktail chatter, you and everyone else. It's not that the ideas never cross their mind whether they're discussing politics, economics, sports, but especially things, let's go a little beyond sports, serious stuff, politics. It's not that a man has never thought about it, literally. All right, now you got that? Now back to the news item. Why talk about something you never think about? Listen to what people talk about, and then look at yourself. Do you think people sit around and think about what they talk about? If you do, you got the same thing for brains as the person that I was referring to fictitiously. No, they don't. Of course, then you can take it a little further and say, well, do people actually sit around and reflect, analyze, mull, ruminate, muse, think over stuff? Well, you answer that. But beyond the literal, rhetorical aspect of that question, do people actually sit around and think about things? You know the answer to that. Beyond that, though it's back to the news item, is people discuss things seriously. Now, to take into account, we'll assume that you would have answered that no, people do not sit around as a hobby or as a vocation or an avocation or as an undertaking on their own. They do not normally sit around and think about anything. But beyond that, in general, consider now two people discussing something in a quite passionate, vigorous way, politics, the current administration in our country, and the legislation being passed, and people are really sweating, and intellectual people, passionate people, well-read, and they're staying there nose to nose. You know, some of the people around them may even fear that it will get beyond just a verbal discussion, but quite passionately. And they're coming up with facts and figures and throwing it back and forth, and it's a real kind of verbal hardball, back and forth. And the truth is, do they ever think about that? Do they sit around and think about what it means to have a Republican in the White House, or to have a socialist government now, finally after all these years, suddenly gone from France? Or what it means to have the 2017 government in Italy since last year? I'm sorry, since World War II. Are you still rolling? I wasn't going to push it much further because it spreads way out. It's not just a deep point, because we've heard it many times. It's covered in one sense in the old question about what you're going to say next. If you're actually conscious and intelligent, as people say, then tell yourself, what are you going to say next? Right now, what are you going to say? All right, that one is things that people discuss quite passionately. And I just picked out politics. I didn't use it for any particular reason, but that people are discussing, or the world of economics, whatever. You know that people do not sit around and think about it. Even if it's something specifically, if they claim it's their, maybe that's what they do read, that is part of their intellectual hobby, is they read all the news magazines, and they listen to, watch all the news shows, and listen to news commentaries. That may be their hobby, and they may be well read and right up to date on current events. But you do know that they do not sit around and think about it, not in any kind of real sense of analyzing it. Well, between you and me, they do not sit around and think about it. Then the question is, I know it's when I stayed on it, I guess sounded somewhat non-plussing. Why talk about something you never think about? The overall response is, hey, what else is new? Or the overall response is, well, what else do people do? But I just wanted you to see specifically in the areas, because it is something that, again, is part of civilization, it's part of the way that life over a large area intellectually moves along, is that people seem to have, especially city intellectuals, ordinary, educated, sophisticated people, seem to have areas that do specifically interest them. They won't just discuss it. They may be out signing petitions. They may be out demonstrating something about, for the ecology, repeal such and such taxes. They may be involved, not just talking about it, but still, they never think about it. So I was going to leave it asking you, think about it. That the world is run, especially again in specific areas wherein it seems to deserve, such as politics, the ecology. If you're an ordinary person, you say, well, this kind of thing demands passionate participants, people to discuss it, to debate it. We've got to have it. I know. And yet those very people, not just ordinary cocktail drinkers and philosophers discussing the latest headline out of the Wall Street Journal, but the people now that apparently make a living, that apparently are deeply passionate and involved with X area, blank area, politics, ecology. They do not think about it any more than a guy that just glances at the headlines to pick up whatever's the top story this today in the New York Times or somewhere, just in case it comes up, something comes up at the water cooler around the office or at the cocktail party. So none of them think about it any more than the other one. Then the question still remains, why talk about something you never think about? Why is not the word, I guess you see by now, but there is no word. You got to take why, and I'll have to do a hand gesture and see if it helps. You have to take the word why and go, like, that's supposed to be sort of a prelude to somebody actually thinking. It's to go, why? It's like a combination of what, how, huh, How the physical and the neural help support one another, subtitle, okay, how they help prop up one another. If men did not have heroes, they could not so readily accept plagiarism as the norm. I can refer you back before we point and infer at your own head. If you did not have heroes, ordinary people, all the way from Marx, Engels, Swift, Johnson, Buddha, Abraham, anybody. If men did not have heroes, they would not so readily accept plagiarism as the norm. That is, they would not accept heroes as being the personification of plagiarism, of weak old fish, of yesterday's news. All right, every great thought that's ever been said, if you can think it all, not just you people, but many ordinary people, they can't admit it because it would be laughing at the underpinnings of the city itself. But any great idea you ever heard from any hero you have, you've heard it before. You've heard it before. It's plagiarized. But if there were not the idea of heroes, that is personifications of plagiarism, if it was just ideas and not people, if we were still talking about actions and not actors, we were talking about verbs and not nouns, that we were talking about the ideas themselves, not where it came from, then all the ideas, humanity go, shit, I've heard all that. You go to see a speech, you go to see the Pope, you go to see the world's most famous philosopher, whoever he might be today, and you go to see him. I mean, you love the guy. You got a Pope T-shirt, or an Adler T-shirt, or somebody T-shirt, and you go to see the lecture, and you won't stick around for his autograph. You just love the guy. But if you separate the hero worship from it, and I don't mean worship necessarily in an adolescent sense, but if you took away the hero worship in the broad sense, and all you were dealing with was the ideas, whatever the Pope said, the rabbi said, Adler said, what some great economist said, some physicist, if you took away the personification of the person whom you already admire, if you took that way and just dealt with the ideas, surely you can hear this. I know it gets a little strange maybe. And you just heard the ideas that the Pope was going to present. That you went there to see him and, you just love religious people who can think and have written philosophical things. But truly, and you go there and suddenly if we could change the game, that you get there with your Pope T-shirt or your philosopher, Hawkins or somebody, and you go there and the person's not there, but what they would have said is said. No, it's just the words, the ideas, and not the person. You'd go, shit. Damn, that's the same old song. You've been singing that song for 2,000 years. Even Led Zeppelin, every 10 years will add one new song to the repertoire. The Allman Brothers throw in something new after 20 years. But this is the same thing. Were it not for actions becoming personified, verbs becoming personified, ideas turning into heroes, were it not for that, plagiarism wouldn't fly. Of course, as always, I'm fooling with reality, because me saying plagiarism wouldn't fly, you can't back up and say, well, wait, we'll correct that. No, you can't correct it. There has nothing wrong. But you could not listen to the same thing over and over and over unless it seemed to be a new process of heroes. And without people understanding it, it's known. That's part of holding up a book. That whoever the latest preacher is, the latest pope can say, he'll make some little comment, whatever he was saying, he'll say, and if I may refer you to what Jesus himself said, or God himself said. He's offering, it's plagiarism. But that is their claim to fame. That is the basis of authority upon which they stand. The philosophers, that's one of the old lines from the East, that we all, even us great thinkers, us thinkers of the day, we all light our lamps of wisdom from the fires of those who've gone before. Or we all stand on the shoulders of giants. That is, if I know anything today, if I'm a philosopher, I only know it because Russell knew it, that he struggled. And Spinoza, he struggled. And Kant struggled. St. Augustine struggled. course, I wasn't using them. For those of you who remember, I had let some guy a good while back, he pointed out after he studied the so-called progression and evolution of human thought, he decided to clean up that old truism. He says, lo, here we stand, or lo, here we are standing on the shoulders of dwarfs. I always liked it, but then again I wrote it. But once you do see, it's worse than standing on the shoulders of dwarfs. Once you realize that all ordinary thought is plagiarism, it's worse than standing on the shoulders of mere dwarfs and midgets. I mean, if you can think, you look down, you think, well, it's bad enough I'm standing on the shoulders of a dwarf, but the son of a bitch is a plagiarist. He's a fraud. I mean, it's bad enough. Nobody likes to be caught standing on the shoulders of a dwarf. It makes you look bad anyway. I mean, there it is. You think, well, if there's anything to a man, why is he on the back of some, poor little dwarf? Some little person. Stand up, sir. Don't be a sissy. Be your own man. So it's bad enough to be caught standing, trying to be somebody, and suddenly realize, you're looking out at great intellectual vistas like you're Magellan or somebody, and you find out that you're floating on a dinghy, except the dinghy is a dwarf that's gone before you. I mean, that's kind of embarrassing, right? But then to look down, it's not even a reasonably talented dwarf. He's not but a damn plagiarist. It's a dwarf passing as a dwarf. But if I may jump from that is why you cannot see, I took it to another extreme, you can't even see other humans as being just at your norm, whatever that is. You can't, much less see them as being less, like you can't see that I'm standing on the shoulders of plagiarists. Dwarfs, in fact. People not just semi-talented, in other words, people, my peers, whatever talent I have, whatever originality I have, I'm standing at least on the shoulders of my peers. I mean, you can't do that, much less say, wait a minute, these are not even my peers. But whoever's shoulders you're standing on, it's worse, because if they're dead, they are plagiarists if you're standing on them. Now, you have to go from that extreme, since we're in a binary world, to the other extreme. That you have to see all of these pygmy plagiarists who went before you, no matter who it was. Buddha, if they're dead, your grandfather. If they're dead, they're a plagiarist. They're a dwarf. So you have to see it just the opposite. We stand on the shoulders of the giants who have gone before. And you clutch the writings of Plato, of God himself. They must be heroes. If you did not see other humans as being heroes here and there, then you would not accept plagiarism as being the intellectual norm. You wouldn't be offended, and you certainly wouldn't call them dwarfs. But if suddenly this voice cried out, this is God talking, and I'm busy, I'm not going to come down in person and ruin everything, but I'm singing over this guy named George, who'll be there in a minute, and he's got a secret message for you because you've been so diligent and you've always wanted to find out what was going on, so he's going to show up, and I'm sending him personally. You'll know him. He'll be wearing a red carnation. And so the guy shows up, and he tells you, he says, God sent me to tell you this. It's just between you and me. If we had the cone of silence, I'd tell you. And it gives this message from God. If you can think at all, that is, if you don't have heroes, you don't have enemies, you got no opposition, you got nothing against George, you just, maybe you're hallucinating, but a voice said, this is God, and I'm seeing a guy named George with a red carnation. So he shows up, and he tells you, and you do not hear him as a hero. You don't see him as a hero. You got no heroes. You got no dwarfs in your life. You got no giants. You're trying to think. Then I can tell you beforehand, in case you hadn't already figured out, whatever he tells you is going to be plagiarized. What he's going to tell you, well, I've heard that. At least I saved me going through that whole description. What if God came down a flying saucer in Akron and called everybody over there? You remember that one? This is just a variation. But you don't really have to wait for him to speak. I guess you might be decent and say, well, George, what is it? Go ahead, as long as you came this far, tell me. But a thinker knows what everybody else is going to say. Everybody. He knows what everybody else is thinking. You don't have to read minds. That's back to the dwarfs. They have to go, oh, perhaps if I did, if I could cause myself specifically in certain ways to hallucinate, if I starve myself or meditate, maybe I'll be able to read minds. Jesus, Holy Mother. All you got to do is think. You read minds. Now, say you read minds, you've already read them. I mean, it's not like you have to keep up. You don't have to subscribe. You don't have to keep checking to see if you're up to date. At least while you're alive, you know what everybody thinks. You know what everybody thought before you, up till now, and you know what everybody's going to think right now until you die. I mean, so that's it. There is no surprise. It's all plagiarized. Nobody's going to tell you anything that you don't know. Nobody's going to tell you anything on this planet that you never heard. No ordinary person. So, whatever, if George or anybody shows up, if you don't take them as a hero, if they're not pre-sold, see that thing I did about the voice of God, all that, that's them coming out and say, well, welcome to Joe's Comedy Club. Tonight we've got one of the funniest men you will ever see, at least from Akron. One of the funniest guys. That was the introduction. And here he is. I know you've been waiting. Here it is. The Allman Brothers was Sinatra for one night only, right here. And then you go, oh! In other words, whatever your hero was. God said, I'm singing down George. That was the intro. But if that didn't work, if you don't have any heroes, in other words, God's not your hero, so you got no hero. George shows up, or a guy says he's George and got a red carnation, you got nothing to do. You say, well, all right, George, what is it? Hey, you're just passing the time, as the Cajuns would say, but you're not expecting anything. You know what he's going to say. You might not know the exact words, but anything he says is plagiarized. Anything he says, you've already thought. So the only way the ordinary world runs in a kind of intellectual fashion that I'm describing is by having heroes. And the ultimate hero, of course, is non-entities, gods, the dead. That makes plagiarism to ordinary people just even a bit more tolerable. Well, yeah, I've heard all that before, but, Jesus, a dead man said it. I'm not going to. God, kind of, if you can buy that, kind of transcends it all. You think, well, shit, I've heard all that. And then somebody says, yeah, but God said it. And if you're that kind of person, if God was your hero, then you do have to kind of back off and think, well, that's true. Who am I to tell God he can't repeat himself? Maybe he figures that all of us didn't hear it yet. In other words, most people that believe in God don't see fit to really become a direct critic, of the old man. But then the other part, just this side of having that kind of almost unassailable hero, like, well, I know I've heard it all, but Jesus, God said it. Then somewhere this side of that are dead heroes. That still makes it, you understand, a little more palatable. That somebody says, God is love, or the only way that you will live an upright life is to live it for your fellow man. And you think, gee, I've heard that before. Or maybe at first you're a little more sharp and you say, you don't know the crowd you're with. Just somebody says, here's the important message. The only way to live an upright life is to live it for your fellow man. And just to be on the safe side, you might say, did God say that? I'm new around here. And they say, well, no, God didn't say that. So you know what's coming next. Whoever said that didn't say it. You go, well, did you say it? If you just want to make conversation, they're going to say, well, no. Now here's where it comes to make it a bit more palatable. Because if you had any sense rather than you going, well, that's a crop of shit. And I've heard that so many times, that's got no effect. They've been saying that for thousands of years. Rather than that, you say, or at least you know what they're going to say next. They're going to say, well, no, God didn't say that directly. But one of our great social leaders, one of our great past thinkers, remember, you're in some new territory, some new city somewhere. They're going to say, but one of our founders, one of the intellectual pillars of our intellectual life today, and you already know he's dead, he said it. Because you understand, if he's dead, he's approaching the status of God. Now, who's going to kick around a dead man? If they say he was one of our founders, he helped establish one of the first hospitals here, he was real nice to kids and animals, and he said that. And they look at you like, what are you going to make of it? You think, what are you going to do? The man's dead. They seem to think a lot of him. What are you going to tell them? Well, why do you people listen to that crap? The people have been saying that for thousands of years. That is nothing but plagiarism. And you start trying to rip out books from your own city or other city and say, that's nothing new. You guys think that that's great just because he said it. He was nothing but a plagiarist. I mean, what the hell? The guy's dead, right? It makes it a bit more palatable. But back to the original Adam. If men did not have heroes, they could not so readily accept plagiarism as the norm. It ends up leaving you, as you know, kind of right here on your own cutting edge. if there's anything to think if there's anything to know that's not been plagiarized, there's only one place you're going to get it. Now, I give it my best shot. I worked in a news item the other day, I say me, that said that, I wasn't that specific, but this kind of stuff is kind of like the war against plagiarism fought on your behalf. But somebody can't really fight your fight for you, if indeed it's a fight. Somebody can't do it for you, but this kind of stuff, what little public side of it there is, like us doing this, in a sense, you know, even though I don't hold everybody by the hand and say, well, yes, I can see that in some ways you have certain intellectual blind spots, and I've been fasting for the last 3 weeks and praying for you nightly that you'd get over that. I got love with you. I don't do that a lot. But in general, it's a fight on your behalf against plagiarism. How do you think this is? Now, I say on your behalf, not just you, as whoever would be here that was interested in it, that whatever is going on, me, somebody else doing it some other time, is a fight, it's a struggle against plagiarism on your behalf, on life's behalf. A teensy-weensy part of life's behalf. Teensy-weensy bit. It's like a little peephole looking into tomorrow. Because anything that's not looking in that direction is dwarfs. It's heroes. It's dead people. It's plagiarism. And of course, to look at the good, exhilarating way is to sit there right now and go, and see something for yourself and go, I'll be damned. And on the way home think the same thing, and then have the wherewithal to go, Jesus, what is that smell? What kind of hobby is it that you find a brand new stamp, you're a stamp collector, and you've been looking for this one, or you never even saw one like it, and you look down and sure enough there's a place for it, and you put it in, and you can't return the page back. Oh, you can try, but every time you turn it back, it stinks. There's a certain unpleasantness occurs. Is that a hobby? Then you have to ask somebody, you can say, if you're ordinary, you go, why in the hell would somebody take up a hobby that even when you think we'll assume, if I know a person, they would say, well, I'll assume from the way you're putting it, at least allegorically, that you can't ever complete your stamp collection. You can't ever get the book full. Okay, let's say that. And then the ordinary person say, but what you're insinuating now is every time that you get a new stamp, it doesn't even count. Every time you get a brand new stamp, one that you didn't have and you put in your book, it doesn't even count. You're no closer to being there. See, if I answered yes, then an ordinary mind would take that in a negative way. They go, well, shit. No wonder I didn't like this. No wonder it doesn't sound right. Whereas other kinds of people go, well, how's she going to stay alive? There was a rallying cry from last time. It said it would be a thinker's, perhaps, great battle cry. That was long live the unfinished. I guess that's enough.